Good evening. It is Thursday, September 12th, 2024 at 6 p.m. We are at the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the land of the Mdewakanton Dakota people. Mdewakanton means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. Our first item on the agenda is 1.0, roll call. Dana?
Ryan Clark.
Here.
Sharon Van Leer.
Here.
Eric Tessmer.
Here.
Pat Driscoll.
Here.
Melinda Doles.
Here.
Simi Petniak.
Here.
Katie Schwartz.
Here. 2.0, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, 3.0 is approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion by Melinda, seconded by Sharon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. On to our 4.0, which is our workshop items. 4.1 is our community education update presented by Jake Winchell, Director of Community Education.
Thank you. Good evening, Board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight to give you an update on some of the wonderful programs we had going on here in South Washington County Schools over the course of the summer. In this presentation today, you'll hear me talk about early childhood, kids club, enrichment and recreation, adult programs, targeted services, extended school year, and credit recovery. I'll start here with our early childhood, starting with ECFE, which stands for Early Childhood Family Education. As you know, it's oftentimes a family's first interaction with the school district is through ECFE. ECFE is designed for families of students ages birth through age 5. And ECFE was really busy over the course of the summer. They were at 16 events across South Washington County Schools community with Schoolie. On 2 occasions, they held events at the Washington County Library Storytime, and they served over 73 families with infants over the course of the summer. Another early childhood program that you may be familiar about is early childhood screening, which is a requirement of families before children enter kindergarten. Early childhood screening is a program that community education runs. We try to screen as many children at an early age as possible for a variety of reasons, but as you may know, identifying students at an earlier age, connecting them with resources is only going to benefit that student as they grow. So in addition to that, there is a reimbursement from the state for screening, and that reimbursement level is a little bit higher at the earlier age. So we try to screen at age 3 as much as we can, and age 4 and age 5 as well. So, but it is a requirement before entering kindergarten. This summer we screened 36 students at age 3, 25 at age 4, 35-year-olds, and there were 2 6-year-olds who were screened over the course of the summer. A total of 93 screenings conducted over the course of the summer. Moving on, Kids Club, which is our school-age child care program. You're probably aware that school-age child care often drives the community education budget. So the healthier the school-age child care program, that community education budget is probably going to be a little bit healthier as well. During the school year, Kids Club operates out of every single elementary school, providing before and after school care. In the summer, we consolidate down to 4 sites. This summer, we operated out of Bailey, Cottage Grove, Middleton, and Valley Crossing elementary schools. We're open from June 13th to August 22nd. And they run from 6:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. And obviously that's a change from the school year because the kids aren't going to school during that day. So there's a lot of contact hours with those kids. And Kids Club does a wonderful job of providing engaging opportunities for the kids all summer long. You can see here some historical data dating back to summer of 2019. We see a high of 1,200 enrollments in Kids Club, which I would guess is probably pretty close to an all-time high for Kids Club. It would be if I was to venture to guess. The summer of 2020, we ran into COVID, and that year there was no child care in schools, and we were providing essential care for Tier 1 and Tier 2 workers. And as you can see there in 2021, that it really devastated school-age child care, and that's not unique to South Washington County Schools. That was statewide. We've slowly worked our way back. To this year, we set a post-pandemic high of 903 enrollments. And our staff would consider ourselves to be at capacity just based on our structure and the number of sites that we're operating out of. As I mentioned, we're open from 6:30 to 6 p.m. daily. And with those hours and those number of enrollments and daily participation, we saw over 650,000 contact hours with kids this summer. Kids Club couldn't do it on our own. We have lots of support over the course of the summer, and we wanted to recognize some of those groups. Nursing, for example, supported student needs all summer long for us. couldn't do it without them. Nutrition services provided healthy meals, including a catered breakfast, lunch, and a snack program. You know, that's a long summer, and I mentioned they find really good things for kids to do all summer long, and that includes a weekly field trip at each site. So we can't do that without bus drivers to get our children to these field trips. So we appreciate them and our custodians. In addition to supporting the needs all summer long, you know, they work around us, right? We're in our elementary schools when they have their duties to clean that building, to get the previous school year cleaned up and then get ready, ramped up for the upcoming school year. So they do a wonderful job of working around us, and we do our best to work together to move out of certain areas so they can get in there and clean and prepare for the next school year. As I mentioned, lots of fun activities for students to do over the course of the summer. They have a literacy focus all summer long, which includes tracking reading minutes, much like you see a lot of times during the school year. We had lots of guest readers, including Dr. Brooke, as you can see there in one of those pictures, and representatives from the Cottage Grove Police Department came and were guest readers as well. They committed to providing 60 minutes of movement per day, as done through a variety of means, to meet the needs and ability levels of all children. Here's an example, kids participating in a color run. Then there's a service aspect to Kids Club in the summer. All students participated in a school supply and book drive, which supported South Washington County Cares, SoWashCo Cares Foundation. And all sites hosted a Wheels Go Around Day where children were able to bring bikes from home and ride bikes at school. So lots of fun activities for kids. And then the summer wrapped up with our carnival, where all 4 sites consolidated into one, where we provided games. They had a barbecue. There's lots of dancing and fun activities for kids to do. It was a really fun activity. Kids were really having a good time. It was great to see. Staff across community education stepped up here. We had office staff who were popping popcorn and helping out with this event too. So it was a cool event to wrap up the summer. Moving on to our next department here, Schoolie. Schoolie was busy. You probably saw Schoolie out and about this summer. Schoolie had 48 school visits over the course of the summer, participated in 4 parades, was in 15 special events, and in these events and Schoolie visits served over 3,780 meals, and there are 32 community partners that help make Schoolie a possibility. Moving into more community education, some youth enrichment courses. We offered 181 courses, which led to 2,826 total enrollments this summer. So kids had lots of opportunities. In camps, clinics, gymnastics, and aquatics, which is a huge part of our summer. You see here over 800 different courses and over 5,000 enrollments here. There's a change here. If you saw some historical data in the total number of enrollments here, you'd probably see that this number is a little bit lower than previous years. Those numbers reflect a change in the way that we operate some of our vendors. They're now independent contractors instead of operating as school district employees, and that was a change that we looked to make. So even though the enrollments would look like they're lower, those independent contractors are paying rent on the facility, and it's really a wash in the end. So we have adult programs. This is overseen by Susie Evans and her team. In the adult programs we had running this summer, we had adult enrichment, adult basic education, and our senior programs. You see in these pictures here, there's a group that took a trip to, there's trips and tours that we offer, as you can see in the picture there, Generations Cafe and the Senior Center and GED programs. We had over 100 students participating in adult basic education over the course of the summer. The Senior Center operated out of Armstrong Elementary due to construction. It did lead to an extra week of shutdown for the Senior Center, but everybody took it in stride and they're back up and running in the DPC now. Moving on, I'll talk about Targeted Services Summer School. Targeted Services Summer School ran July 8th through August 1st, 4 days a week. They ran for 5 hours per day. Elementary students ran from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. They operated out of Gray Cloud and Nuevas Fronteras Elementary Schools. The middle school students, again, ran for 5 hours from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. They were at Cottage Grove Middle School, and this is for students entering grades 1 through 8. You see some numbers here. You see a nice increase in 2024 from 2023. 967 students were enrolled in Targeted Services Summer School. A good jump in both elementary school and middle school. The bigger jump was in middle school. Part of this increase was the goal of the targeted services team was to send out 1,500 invitations for targeted services, with 800 to 1,000 students enrolled over the course of the summer. And you can see there with 967 enrollments, they were on the high end of what their goal was. So I think they're very happy with that. And one other change, they're able to send those extra invitations out this year because the criteria to qualify for targeted services changed from meeting 2 criteria from 3. So more students were eligible for targeted services, which led to a bigger overall enrollment too. Some of the day-to-day aspects of targeted services, they saw an updated curriculum this year. Their theme for the summer at the elementary level was to be kind, be strong, and be well. They had a literacy, math, and science aspect to their day, and they were served breakfast and lunch as well as they were transported. The middle school program, again, benefited from an updated structure and curriculum. Their theme was to engage, achieve, belong, and celebrate. They had a 3-day period with a home base and a lunch as well. They had math, ELA, and an elective. They had project-based learning, STEM challenges, and they were served breakfast as lunch as well as provided with transportation. Targeted services looking ahead to 2025. Again, they'll offer 4 weeks of programming. Their eligibility for criteria may be adjusted again based on capacity. They'll look to increase that enrollment, and they'll continue to focus on highly engaging, activity-based curriculum and positive relationships. Our next program, Extended School Year, also known as ESY, it operated July 8th through the 25th. There are 460 students served from early childhood to age 22. To make this happen, it takes a lot of staff. There are 60 licensed staff plus related service providers working this summer, in addition to approximately 100 paraprofessionals and other support staff. They operated out of Liberty Ridge Site 2, Great Cloud Elementary, Cottage Grove Elementary, Cottage Grove Middle, Eastridge High School, Pathways School, and community-based and work-based learning experiences as well. 460 students this year. In 2023, they served 373 students, so an increase there as well. Lastly, I'll talk about credit recovery. This is overseen by Ashley Ruka and South Washington Alternative High School. Over the course of the summer, over 400 credits were earned amongst the various high schools. Park High School students earned 99 of those credits. Woodbury High School earned 190 of those credits. Eastridge High School, 86 credits. The Alternative High School students earned 26 and a half credits, and online students earned 5 credits over the course of the summer. That concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I had some questions. Thank you so much. One of the questions I had was, with the credit recovery at the high schools, can you tell me what drove Woodbury High School to have twice as many credits recovered as any of the other schools?
That's a great question. I thought I maybe get that question, so I did check with Ashley Ruka. She did say Woodbury had more students enrolled in credit recovery over the course of the summer. She also said it's hard to measure just due to the nature of credit recovery and where students are at in their credit recovery progress, I suppose. Some students have worked harder up to that point, so some of it's just a timing thing, but there certainly were more students from Woodbury High School as well.
Okay. And then with the, can you tell us the difference between like an extended school year, who would go to extended school year versus targeted services?
Yeah, right. And the way I understand extended school year is somebody who receives IEP services. And then extended targeted services could be a variety of criteria that they meet. I mentioned that in the previous years they have to meet 3. This year was 2. It could be progress in school. It could be chronic absenteeism. It could be a variety of reasons. But students who aren't necessarily on an IEP.
Okay. Yeah. Do we know what drives, like you said you gave out 1,500 invitations to get 800 or to 1,000. Is that like a typical net
response?
Yeah.
Great question. I don't know that, but I'd be happy to ask that question and I can follow up with you.
Do we know what drives people not to accept targeted services in the summer? I don't know.
Great question. Yep.
Oh, vacation? Oh, okay.
I think some of it has to do with the timing of when we offer targeted services and if families are around. And I think we actually appreciate that. If we know families or students are going to miss a week and a half of time, it's really difficult to kind of slide them in the middle of something. And so that really is a good turnout, though, to have over 800 students. Kelly?
The only thing I'd add, too, is that for middle school, we did a lot different this year, is that our teachers had the information at conferences, and we invited every kid to summer school. And then we worked with them and their programming to see where we could qualify them. There were very few students who didn't qualify under the new criteria. And so instead of saying, here's an opportunity targeted for you, it was like, hey, do you want to sign your kid up for summer school? So it was a different approach at middle level this year. So that's why you saw a bigger increase for middle school in particular.
So literally like 1,300 students times 4 middle schools were all invited?
Yes. And that's exclusive of the cards and everything and all of the outreach that Targeted Services Department did. So, yeah.
So as far as the extended school year, I know I'm in the SEEK committee, and I know I've heard parents talk about, like, not as many people qualify as they used to. Like, you have to have more severe type of diagnoses or whatever. Is that because we have more special ed kids than we used to, so less qualify, or how does that work?
Erin, do you want to take that one? Do you have a mic?
Great question. It's very hard to generalize any patterns because our students change from year to year. Our seniors or 22 plus move on, our kinders come in. I would say I could certainly compile some data, but it's always individually determined. So the criteria that's set forth by the federal and state regulations has not changed at all. It's IEP teams that determine a student's need to receive those extended services through the summer. So increases could reflect the trending that we're seeing with incoming kindergartners and earlier identification of eligibility for sure. And then also we have the opportunity to serve our oldest students for an additional year. So that's a whole kind of cluster of students we could potentially serve.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have a question actually. Jake, with the Kids Club, that's not state funded, is it?
Correct, that is not state funded, that is
Okay.
a fee-based program.
So, can you tell me about the fees? How much are they, that kind of thing?
Right, great question. I don't know off the top of my head what the exact fee is, but it is, typically it is county assistance eligible. So if a family can't afford that fee, if they qualify for child care assistance, they'd be, through the county, they'd be able to attend our program.
Pay per day then, essentially?
Per day, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
It's expensive.
It's quality.
Actually, that brings up another point. So what, you said that we're at 900 post-pandemic. What is the, so our sites are capacity constrained. Is it like a staffing issue that prevents us from opening additional spaces, or have we found that like this is the right amount?
Yeah, I think Kids Club staff would say, for our current setup, would say that that's just the right amount. Staffing has been an issue, certainly in the last handful of years, but I do think that there's a magic number as far as we wanted to see this many kids on a waiting list before we added an additional staff. And some students also require maybe some additional services or maybe a one-on-one staff as well. So even though we might have a waiting list, we might be waiting for a staff who can just serve one student or to help get one student enrolled in the program. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, on to 4.2, and that is our strategic plan priorities for 2024-25. That will be presented by Julie Nielsen, Superintendent.
Great, thank you, Katie. While the slide deck is coming up, as we begin year 2, it's hard to believe. I don't know if it's just the age, but as we look back and we think about all the timing, it feels like we've been working on our strategic plan a long time in terms of community involvement, bringing information back to the board, going back to the community, but we are actually on year 2 of our strategic plan. And this evening, we'd like to share the big work in our areas of focus and priority as we go into this school year. And along with that, taking a look and being more descriptive around what those results and how we'll measure those. So this evening, I'm going to go ahead and start out in terms of outcomes, examining the components of our strategic roadmap. Again, just solidifying when we use different terms, what does that mean? Sharing the 24-25 big work of the district, reviewing with board members and any community members watching the desired daily experiences. As I've shared with board members, those DDEs, as we call them, really are reflected in our vision card and what we're measuring. And then talking about what instruments or tools we're going to use to measure those results. So first off, our strategic roadmap, and what you see here is, in working with TeamWorks, is what they would summarize as our strategic roadmap. The core components of mission, vision, our core values, And then we all use a little bit different terminology, but I call them the buckets of work. And underneath there are the 5 buckets of work from student experience. Mastery of learning and expectations really gets at the academics, our student pathways and supports, operations, staffing, and finance, and then of course engagement, and partnerships. So here we have the mission of South Washington County Schools is to educate students for success. And in talking with staff and having them in one big arena, we talked about what does educating students for success look like? What does that mean? And while obviously there's always that academic success, which is definitely a strength, there were a lot of other things in the way of problem solving, independence, teamwork, collaboration that really comes up when we think about making sure the education is well-rounded. Obviously with a focus on the academics, but when we talk with staff, there are definitely other words that come into play when we talk about that educating students for success. Our vision statement, this is one, honestly, while we haven't been super focused on, we look at it occasionally, but that is the way off in the future, leading by example, working with our student, staff, and families and community to support each student. And I think every day in our daily work, we look to make that happen, to act with integrity and to work with others around us. And then the core values, people love that I have a little 2 I's, 2 E's, and a C. And as we ground ourselves in these core values and we look for opportunities and stories throughout our district, just remembering what those core values are and that they're grounding. So connections, integrity, equity, excellence, and innovation. Just so you know, on the innovation, we've taken off the E. That's the I. Otherwise, it would be 3 E's and 2 I's. Just so you know, that's what made sense in my head, Ryan. 2 I's, 2 E's, and a C. I don't know, there was a little rhythm to that, 2 I's, 2 E's, and a C. And it's important because people will talk about our work and what core value does that work align to. And then just to point out again, making it a little bit larger is just those buckets of work. And these buckets of work were determined by our strategic planning group. When we looked at everything that was happening in the district, these are the high level areas, and then underneath there, what you're going to see this evening are the various specific areas that we're going to be addressing that fit into those buckets. So what's our big work of the district? And it's important to know when we talk about strategic planning, everything becomes a priority. And so our question is always, how do we prioritize the priorities to make sure that in our large system, we're not overloading our teachers. We're not overloading our bus drivers with a new ID, with a new driving system, whatever that is, to make sure that everything makes sense and is seamless. Not that every department is doing their own individual work without consideration for the whole. And so we're going to go through the 5 areas, or the 5 big buckets, and executive cabinet members are going to help do the presentation as they oversee much of the work within the buckets. So if we can go ahead to the next slide. And I believe it is Kelly kicking us off, and then we'll just roll right through. So Kelly, go ahead.
So the first bucket is student experience, and 2 of the projects we want to highlight tonight are program evaluations and district supports for new-to-country students and families. This isn't an exhaustive list of everything we're doing within student experience, and I think you'll also find as in particular, the first 3 buckets of work probably could overlap each other in terms of what goes in each one. But with program evaluations, our goal is that we would have a procedure, a program evaluation library, an inventory of district programs, and a schedule to learn about district programs that we will be heading into program evaluation cycle. And a big part of program evaluation cycle is student voice. How is the program affecting students? And is it giving us what we hoped it would when we created this program? We don't want program evaluation to be something scary that we're going to evaluate you because we may be cutting you type of conversations. This is really for improvement and to understand what the impact is having on our kids and their student experience. The other one is district supports for new-to-country students and families. As you know, our enrollment of these students has increased greatly. And so we want to make sure that we have an onboarding orientation for our families that supports them understanding our system and helping them navigate that. We kicked it off actually last week. We had our first Spanish-speaking parent portal session, and we had over 40 families in learning how to be in the parent portal and understanding what information they could access about their student in the parent portal. So that was pretty cool. The other piece of that is making sure our schools are ready to receive these families. So that accountability checklist is just kind of those things that every school should be thinking about when they have a new-to-country family enroll in their school. So those are two of the areas that we're highlighting for student experience.
The next strategic direction that we will update you on is mastery of learning and expectations. As Superintendent Nielsen said, this is the academic piece that gets a lot of the attention, and rightfully so. And so we are in alignment with the READ Act and with the training that is taking place statewide. I would say South Washington County Schools is leading out. And what I mean by that is we are making sure that our staff are trained in year one, whereas other school districts kind of phasing it out. But South Washington County is leading out, and we are emphasizing and having all of our licensed educators go through training. And that training has commenced with literacy training for our elementary licensed staff and also our secondary licensed staff. The elementary licensed staff are going through Carry All training, and our secondary staff are going through core literacy training. They began that training during workshop week. With synchronous sessions and also some asynchronous work leading up to that synchronous session. And then on a monthly basis, that training will continue and prepare our staff to not only have the confidence and competence as it pertains to literacy, but it will position us to have common language and common expectations K-12 as it pertains to literacy. In addition to that, the elementary literacy screener is also being put in place this school year. Staff have been trained, and now the screeners are actually taking place this week and next week at all elementary sites. And through this process, we will be able to identify specific opportunities for increased, I would say, instruction, purposeful instruction for our elementary students. That way we can help move the needle a little bit faster as it pertains to literacy and specific reading needs for our elementary students.
Can you get back to the program evaluations? Can you give me some examples of the programs so we can get an idea of what those are?
Sure.
One elementary year.
Yep. So one that we just completed was Spanish immersion. We have program evaluation currently going on with our AVID program. We have an EL program evaluation that has been ongoing and continuing. Other programs we may consider probably eventually would be MTSS. I would say also eventually would be our impact of literacy training on our staff and like our literacy program. So I think those are some that come to mind. I'm kind of looking around. Aaron, I know Aaron is really into program evaluation, so I know there's many within our student support services that Aaron will be part of as well.
Can you speak to what MTSS is?
Yeah, it's the multi-tiered system of support, sorry, those acronyms, in which we make sure we have tier 1 or core instruction, and we're reaching at least 80% of our kids in that tier 1 core instruction, and then we have an intervention, so core and more in tier 2. And then we have some intensive intervention for students who are well below grade level.
That would be tier 3.
That would be tier 3.
Kelly, when you're talking about the program evaluation, so this year is just developing the evaluation and developing like a evaluation cycle, correct?
Correct, because evaluation's been happening for the last couple of years. Dr. Mal Jacobson has been working on it. What we're hoping to do here is make sure people understand when they're part of a cycle. And then who is going to decide when we are going to look at doing program evaluations, particularly because people see the benefit of it, and then they come to Dr. Mal Jacobson and say, I really would like to do a program evaluation. And so we want to have a process where we will consider programs for evaluation and have a cycle.
Typically, when you're doing these evaluations, do you have like similar questions or rubrics across all programs, or is each program really highly individualized?
I would say that it's highly individualized, but there's a national standard for the program somewhere. So for example, in the Spanish immersion, and I know I won't remember the program, but she used a national standard for immersion programs as the rubric in which she measured our programming against. So obviously we can't use that one for every program. So there's usually a national standard that we measure against.
Okay, and so how does, for Spanish immersion then, and I'm just picking on this because it's an example, but how does a program evaluation differ from like a school evaluation? Or is, I guess, since they're coterminous.
Right, our programs are always in continuous improvement, to your point, right? We're always wondering how we can do better. This is a very intense process where it is focus groups, it is surveys, it is a deep data dive, it's a historical data dive, and so I would say that it's much more rigorous than what school improvement planning is.
A couple questions. Tyrone, with the literacy screening, you mentioned 3 times a year, 24, 25. Is that more than in the past? That's been increased?
Yes, yes, it will be. This is our first year going with the literacy screening at the elementary level.
Okay.
On a comprehensive scale.
Okay. And then Kelly, a question for you too. In regards to, so like students and families that are new to the country, is there an additional cost associated with students that meet that criteria? And if so, who absorbs that? Is that a local taxpayer thing, or is there federal funding for that, or state funding?
Both. So these students will qualify for EL services. And so we do receive federal funding and state funding for them. But as you know, in our last couple legislative platforms, we have a cross-subsidy in EL services, and I'm looking for Chris. Not nearly what we have for special education services, but I think it's been around $3 million around our cross-subsidy for EL services. So they're not fully funded, is what I would offer. Any student who receives EL services is not fully funded, right, because of that cross-subsidy that we have.
Do you have an estimate? It's probably hard, maybe you can't even quantify it, but do you have an estimate on what you believe the cost might be per year? It's funded $3 million, but is it, you said it's more than that, or?
No, I think $3 million is our additional cost.
Oh, that's okay. That's
yeah.
Yeah, I would say that our cross-subsidy on that, so again, kind of similar to special services, right, that cross-subsidy piece that were unfunded, and then the general fund kind of absorbs, that's about $3 million. So the state aid for EL, they have created a cross-subsidy aid now as we look to FY '27. I believe that one comes into effect as well. And so that will help offset some of that. And they did change some funding as well with that, so we're hoping to see, some gains anyway towards reducing that subsidy in the next couple of years.
Any idea what the trend is on that? I'm assuming it's increasing. Do we know by how much, or?
For the aid itself?
I guess.
For the costs?
For the costs, or?
I can certainly provide that, Eric, because that would be something I could pull up pretty easily, because we do have a specific, how we code it in our system.
And then I guess also just like the numbers of students enrolled in the EL program.
Yeah, and I think that was probably in Nikki and Danilo's presentation a couple months ago, I believe they came, and so we certainly can get that data for you as well.
What's the? Apologize for the questions. What's the deficit, I guess, on the funding versus the cost? Do we have any idea?
And that's the cross-subsidy that we're talking about?
Okay.
It's about $3 million. So we'll get you a more specific
that's
number.
A deficit is $3 million.
Correct.
No plans from the state or anything on closing that, or?
And that's where I think the EL, that cross-subsidy aid that they made some progress for, that'll come, they have to collect data first. So FY '24 will be the first year they start collecting data on that.
Okay.
And then '25, and then we'll actually get the funds in '27. So they need some time to collect some data to make sure that there's consistency across districts and how we're reporting that information as well. So that will help. We're just, I think it'll continue to be a challenge that we face legislatively.
Mm-hmm.
What about the federal cross-subsidy? Well, how much is that?
So that would be included in that. We don't get a significant amount of Title III funding, which is the EL piece. I want to say, I'll get that number for you for sure. In my head, I have less than 100,000, but then I'm been looking at a lot of numbers as we've been doing preliminary levy and working towards audit. So I'll certainly provide that information, but that would be included in when we talk about that EL cross-subsidy. Often we assume that includes the federal aids in there as well, but I'll make sure to get that information.
Do you have to apply for that, or is that,
So Title III is similar to Title I, Title II, and Title III in that certainly we have to submit an application each year. The process has changed slightly. There used to be, it still is, the initial application is due by the end of August. I think it's actually September 1st. We always just shoot for end of August. And that initial application is due by then. It's based on our enrollment numbers though. And so as those increase, we might see some slight increase, but it's still spread across the whole nation on the title funding because it's a federal fund source. And so some of that gets challenging too because it's like, oh, well, our numbers went up, we should go up, but it doesn't always exactly equate to that.
Thanks.
The only thing I'd add to that, Eric, is it's not a competitive grant though. Right. So it's not something that if our application's wrong or that we wouldn't receive those funds. It's the state works with us if our answers need adjusting or things like that. So it's our money is our money. We have to submit the grant for it, but it's not a competitive grant.
Yeah, it's considered a formula grant, and so they have a formula for how they distribute those funds instead.
Sure, and then, but the rest of the costs then are just absorbed by local taxpayers.
That's included in our, so when we talk about just our budget in general, right, and the kind of what the general fund picks up, so whether it's local taxpayers or the state aids, just the general per pupil formula amount that we'll get to talk about this evening too. Correct.
And I think the key thing is that both special education and EL services are mandated services. So by law, if students qualify, we have to provide them. And so that is why administratively we continue to advocate on the legislative platform to fully fund those areas.
Right.
I could share just a little bit of data to circle back to one of your questions. So as of like last December, we were just over 1,400 students that qualified for EL services or eligibility. And just to compare to the state, we sit just under 7% across our district. We have ebbs and flows. We have schools as low as 3%, schools as high as 20% representation. The state sits at about 10.
10 is the average.
Yep, about 10%.
Okay.
Did you say, Chris, that the deficit from EL as far as what the state and federal pays versus what the school eats is higher than the deficit for special ed?
No.
Okay, that's what I was like confused by that.
I just meant it was similar in that, so when I said similar more as far as that we have that cross subsidy, that unfunded piece, right? It's a significantly less dollars compared to that cross subsidy.
Tyrone, I did have one question for you. So for the carry-all versus the core literacy training, what's the difference between the two and why do we have one with primary and one with secondary?
That's a great question. I'm going to let Kelly Jansen, who's heads up that department.
Is that because you didn't pass that class, that carry-all? They actually, we should say when we talk about the READ Act training, many leaders have been through the training. So I'm looking around the table, but I know Kelly, Christine, and Tyrone, Aaron, they've all done parts of the training, and they successfully completed it.
Not at 100% though.
Not 100%.
Okay with that. I am okay with that. So MD put forward 3 trainings. 2 were through the University of Minnesota, letters and carry-all. Letters we automatically ruled out because it was 150 hours. And then carry-all and then core, Online Language and Literacy Academy, so OLA, were between 45 and 54 hours, both of them. When our directors of teaching and learning looked at the content, we really liked what core and OLA did with relating it to classroom teachers in the secondary. And so we put our secondary teachers into the OLA cohort, and the University of Minnesota, many of our teachers have done letters already, and so we wanted that natural fit with carry-all for our elementary teachers. So both of them are approved by the Department of Education as approved training programs.
Okay. And then you said all licensed staff will be going through, so that includes like counselors and so how do they fit in with how the training works?
So we would offer too that we have another training for that is through core, but it is completely synchronous. So it's with a trainer, and our counseling, our elective type courses are going through that one because they weren't in that list from MD in particular. But I would offer that all of our teachers have an impact on literacy for our kids. And all of our families and all of our businesses and all of our community can impact literacy for kids. And so we really wanted to send that message that you can impact the literacy of a kid. And it really expands it beyond reading for children. And so I think myself going through it, I told Julie, like, I feel like I can teach a kid to read now, even though I know I can't. But it was just really good to understand how kids' brains work when they're trying to learn how to read. So.
Is this in alignment with that ARC reading curriculum that we have, or can they be used, can the carry-all training be used as they're teaching with the ARC curriculum?
Absolutely. So the training is about the science of reading and the how to teach reading, and the ARC is the resources used to do that.
We lose track of where we're at now. But good questions, board members. This is a great opportunity. This is our big work, so thank you. I think now we're moving on to Erin and Christine, student pathways and supports.
All right, so when we look at student pathways, we're looking at what are the pathways and supports we have for our students. So, and as Julie mentioned earlier, a lot of these overlap or are involved with the other pieces. So MTSS, as Kelly already very nicely described, is a framework for our schools to look at data and provide interventions for our students. And so by the end of the year, we hope to have that K-12 framework for all of our schools. And we hope to also have leadership teams formed and working on the framework, not just to create it, but implement it in all of our schools. Since we are in progress with that. Oh, next is Erin.
Do you want to just jump down to the
Sure. So I have the third one, Toolkit to Support Culturally Affirming Learning and Events, and that is through our DEI department. They're creating a toolkit and some resources for schools if they would like to, if and when they provide programming for families. So like, for example, in October, we have our Hispanic Heritage Month, and they're a big part of resources and supporting those events that our schools would like to put on throughout the school year.
Pause for questions. Okay. All right, so circling back to special education, we are working across services and levels to just really look closely at the continuum of services and supports that we provide through special education. So to kind of circle back to the comparison, we serve about 4,000 students in special education as of just last week. About 800 of those are our youngest learners, 0 to 5. And so we just want to pause and take a look at all the good things that are happening in our system and really intentionally look at how to grow that so that we can leverage and support better outcomes for more students. And so that process will, of course, be grounded in our commitment to make sure that the work that we're doing at the district office and at the district level is translating into support and responsiveness to our teachers and our service providers that are working with our kids every day. That has to be what we stay grounded in. We are obligated by the law and by a commitment to best practice that what we're using and doing is grounded in research and evidence of some sort so that we can predict reasonably that it'll be good for kids and good for teachers. In special education, we often talk, and we're going to talk more about this idea of high leverage practices. So what are the instructional strategies, approaches, and resources that leverage and increase the progress and success of our students? And so that'll be language that we circle back to as we begin to kind of articulate what we want to do and move forward. Our focus will also be on how we collaborate effectively within our buildings and across disability areas and specialties. And again, just really getting grounded in what are the core strategies and supports that work well for kids, and how do we support our teachers in doing great work with that. Extending from kind of that process of looking at the overall experience specific to special ed, we want to take from that what we can glean to assess how our support services are working for kids and for staff and for families, like social work, the mental health supports that we provide in our schools and in our partners with our interagency partnerships throughout the community. And then we're partnering with Hanover Research to do a survey across our state at how public school districts, big, medium, and small, figure out the best approach to caseloads. So caseloads refers to the number of students that are served by one special education teacher or case manager. And there's lots of factors that go into that: the number of service minutes, the impact of disability, the level of services being provided. And it hasn't really been something we've looked closely at in my 5 years here. And that's not uncommon or unique to us. And I think the time is really prime for us with the talent in our system, the leadership in this space, to look a little bit more intentionally at how we make decisions in terms of our allocations, again, staying grounded in what's best for kids. And so we're going to partner with Hanover to look at what's happening across our state and see what's working well for other districts that might work well for us as well. The next piece in terms of a focus area for this year is our multilingual enrollment processes. So our partners, Nikki and Danilo, who you've met and all heard from even or about tonight, have worked really hard to improve the very first experience that we have with our families who are new to country, new to us, learning English as a second language, or perhaps third, fourth, English as not a native language. So starting with a flow chart that just really outlines and articulates the responsibilities and roles of every person from that very first interaction when a family enrolls with us to when we hand out a schedule and welcome them into our school buildings, and that's already up and going. Additionally, we're required to have a language instructional education plan, one more acronym, LIEP, and that is drafted and in process, and our expectation is that would be living out, fully implemented by the end of the year. We've always had it. We've always been required to. We're just working on making it better in terms of our family or our user experience and how those supports are implemented. And then we have a newcomer toolkit that the U.S. Department of Education has provided to public school districts. That's amazing. And it's like 57 pages long. So the good news is we already have something to start from, and then our focus this year will be having that be a standard resource in all of our schools and understood how to pull from and use it to support our families who are considered newcomers. So just for a reference or reminder, a newcomer would be a family that is in K-12 public education who has been in our country for 3 years or less and is learning English.
So our next bucket of work that we'll speak about this evening is operations, staffing, and finance. So one of the first big projects, again, it's not a comprehensive list, but this is some of our big work, is the implementation of Frontline in our professional development department. Frontline is a platform that we currently use for recruit and hire, for absence management, and for teacher evaluations. In an effort to streamline all of the platforms that we use, we are now going to be pulling the tracking of CEUs and professional development into this Frontline platform. We will also be updating classroom teacher rubrics in Frontline on the evaluation side, and then we also will be utilizing the learning management software to do our assurance of compliance training. And so that'll give us a really nice, much more streamlined approach rather than having 4 different systems for 4 different things. Another big project that we're working on is True Time right now, and what this means is that our hourly employees who are still being paid on contract pay will be moved to a system in which they clock in and out. So we have some hourly employees, which is an antiquated system to pay them on contract pay. So what that means is it's even pay spread across the year, and then if there's any overtime, they would voucher for that at that point. And so we are working on implementing this year for a variety of reasons, but really so employees can understand how and why they're paid the way that they are, also for compliance reasons, to be compliant with federal and state laws. So that's a big project that we're working on this year. And then also working on updated evaluations and processes for non-licensed staff evaluations and working with pilot groups this year on those new evaluations, and that will also be run through Frontline.
Are you like a pause for a moment? I have the next slide then. So continuing with operations, staffing, and finance, we are also implementing EduClimber, which is a software. It'll be configured for SoWashCo schools, and training will start for core district and school administrators this year. So right now, this year is kind of that, I'll say onboarding for staff, and then as we roll out to next year for that, transportation of RFID badges, otherwise known as the rider IDs, so that we have a secure, accurate, and reliable way to track bus riders' their status to make sure that we know where all students are who are riding the bus, and increasing that student safety component again. The final one on this slide is a new work order system, and through the facilities, they worked to really look and assess what the needs were, and this will complete the background documentation and auditing of all building assets, and then we're creating a system with transparency and accountability so we can ensure that when there are things that need to get fixed, that there's just a nice fluid process for that instead.
And I'll wrap us up with the engagement and partnerships bucket. Really, our first big work, and we've been working on this all year and last year too, but is focusing on improving some of our translations and interpretations. So we'll be continuing to improve some of the platforms we use to communicate and engage with our multilingual families. Some of the little things that we've been doing so far is to be able to get some different translations into Campus. And so people aren't having to sort of have that just memory of what I click on and where I go, and they can actually read it and understand what they're working through. We also have been working on getting our data in a better place to identify which language families prefer. So that is probably the biggest work that we're working on right now that's going to impact a lot of what we do. And so what we're finding is that we're asking some teachers, we're asking schools to just help us identify who needs different types of translations and interpretations, so that then as we provide those services, we know we're giving it to the families who need it. And then really we're working to create and begin to offer plain language training for all staff. And so what I mean by plain language training is that we want to, there's a lot of EduSpeak in what we use. And so I've been in communications for over 10 years for schools, and I still don't understand some of the things that come across my desk. And so I have to ask a lot of questions, right? To what do you mean by this? And so we want our families to be able to understand what we're sharing with them. And then that, when you're writing in a plain language like that, it also makes things easier to translate. And so everybody's getting that same language and that same message, but it makes it easier to translate, and then it makes it so everybody can understand what we're saying. And so my team works really hard to write like that right now, and we're trying to roll that out to our schools as well. One of the next things that we're working on, and we're close to rolling out, is our new newsletter platform, and I know that I've spoken about this before. We're kind of in that final phases of the data integration of it. So there's a lot of pieces that kind of come together here to make sure that we have all of the lists and things like that when we need, and we didn't want to hand our schools a platform that isn't ready to roll. And so by the end of what this looks like is we'll have a consistency across our schools so that people know where to find this information, how to get it. The translations will be much improved over that once we get to that point. And then our school letters will have that consistent look and feel from elementary to middle to high school. And so sometimes I think there's a lot of difference between what those look like. And so at least families will know what to look for in those newsletter platforms as they come through. And finally, the food rescue program, and this is nutrition services, and we'll be offering a food rescue program in all 23 cafeterias. This will be rolling out, kind of a slow rollout, I think, and the partnership is with Basic Needs Food Bank, and this will allow lower amounts of food going into landfills and help diminish some of the food insecurity with the community members in our community as well. And with that, I think I'm going to click next. I think it's you, Julie, right?
Yep, and so as we think about this big work, if we just took any one of those small components, whether we're talking about RFID badges or implementation of literacy, number one, we know that communications is always involved. Like there's always some type of communication to parents or schools. So I think it's important to know that our directors and the leaders around this table, we have spent time doing what we call project planning. And that really is to help pace us and guide us in our work so that we don't overload the system. What we saw happening is at the beginning of the school year, there were all of these expectations and all of this work. Now it's natural, right? It's the beginning of a school year. But as leaders, we need to not start everything in August as we enter September. So how can we pace that out? And it's really our job as leaders strategically to think about what other time could we start this work? Because otherwise we overwhelm the system, and by the end of September, everyone is tired and exhausted. So as we look forward, I just want to bring to the board's attention and community's attention, and I know this is not new for you, but as part of our strategic planning process, the desired daily experiences, and there were groups of staff, there were groups of students, and there were groups of parents and family members who talked about what they wanted for their children out of South Washington County schools. And these are those desired daily experiences. And why this is important is because this actually will lead us to what we call our vision card. But as we go to the next slide, just to help the board see and make sense, it's really like a sandwich. So at the beginning of our process, we had the desired daily experience of staff, students, and families. As we wrap up, we're going to be measured with those desired daily experiences, and in between is that strategic roadmap and those strategic priorities or those buckets of work. And then as we look at the next slide, it really shows out of that, what happens? So when we think about the strategic priorities and the buckets of work, out of that comes perhaps procedures, policies. We create handbooks. We have implementation maps of the timing. So that's what comes out of the big work. And then as you look at the bottom, the desired daily experiences of staff, students, and family, we create our district vision card or the metrics under which we're going to be measuring our desired daily experiences. And I know board members had the opportunity to take a look at a draft vision card. So if we can go ahead, Sean. Just to share again, when we think about what instruments are we going to use, for the most part, it's going to be student academic data. The Minnesota Student Survey, it actually, I learned, we do it right now 5th, 8th, 9th, and 11th. It can be done at every grade level, and I believe, Kelly, every year. Right now, we do it every 3 years, so that'll be a conversation as we move forward. Of course, the board remembers we had what we call the community survey. That community survey was done in 2022. And at that time, what the board committed to, similar to something we talked about before, is we don't want to just go survey the community when we're cutting budget or when we need a referendum. We want this to be ongoing, and it provides us with great information. So in 2025, I believe it'll be November, December of 2025, we will go back and conduct that same survey to see how do those percentages look and compare to 3 years ago. And then, of course, there are some of the desired daily experiences that don't align to some of these instruments that we already do that we will need to conduct our own district surveys. So what will our vision card include? I'll actually, Sean, have you hop into it because we'll show it right there. So what I wanted to share with board members are the tools that we're going to be using. So an example underneath student achievement data, we would make sure that under that mastery of learning and expectations, and I think it was Dr. Brookins who shared that this is that heavy area when it comes to data. This is just one snippet of what we would be measuring. We would be taking a look at our MCA results in math and in reading. While that's a very high level, we would also have the ability to break it down by student groups. So just an example of how we would use our student achievement data and the academic data. And then next, as it relates to the Minnesota Student Survey, the Minnesota Student Survey is packed with information and the questions they ask. So just to point out here, while our bucket of work is the student experience, the description is actually one of the desired daily experiences. I feel welcomed, cared for, heard, respected, accepted for who I am. So how are we going to measure that? There are 4 questions that are asked on the Minnesota Student Survey that we would grab that data and have that be part of our vision card. So we would take a look at questions like, adults at my school listen to me. At my school, teachers care about me. They're interested in me as a person, and I feel safe at school. And then the community survey, or as I think I labeled up there, the ML community survey, the Morris Leatherman community survey, you will see the measure there. How would you rate the financial management of South Washington County Schools? And then another question is, our community receives a good value from its investment in our local public schools. That really gets at that academic data. Does our community feel like they're getting a good value from the investment? And so you can see again that alignment of questions that are asked in that community survey that we would then be measuring and sharing back with the board. And finally, when we talk about a district survey, of course our schools, they all have their school improvement plans, and so they're out surveying parents and families and staff too. We want something that's more comprehensive so individuals don't get survey overload or survey fatigue. And so we would work together with our schools, and in this particular measure, nowhere else is this question asked, and this is one of the desired daily experience of staff, and that is, overall, I am satisfied with my job in South Washington County Schools. And so that particular metric on the vision card, we would need to conduct a district staff survey. So just to share a little bit about what the metrics are as we move forward. So in terms of strategic planning next steps, continue to work with our district directors in guiding the big work in the school district, review district data to determine the effectiveness of training and what is being implemented. One of the things when we talk about the big work does not come to our table unless we have the data that shows that it needs to be big work, which means that we're not chasing shiny objects, that we really want to be intentional about the work that we're aligning and why we're implementing something. To finalize our district vision card, and then to share a finalized district vision card in March with the board. And then finally, to make sure that our strategic planning information is updated on our website. And so with that, I know we kind of paused in between with any questions, but if there are any other questions for the group.
Any questions? Okay, thank you, Julie, and everyone else. We will move on to 5.0, information items. 5.1 is intra-district transfer and open enrollment presented by Tyrone Brookins, Assistant Superintendent.
All right, so I will be representing my colleagues, the other two assistant superintendents, but I will be the voice. And if you think back to last year, Kelly Jansen was the voice because Christine and I were actually supervising a football game. So no supervision of football games this evening, so we're up. All right. So when the agenda topics that we will cover are the timelines for the intra-district transfers, which we refer to as IDT. We love our acronyms in education. And then we'll also talk about policy 509, which is open enrollment, timelines for applications, and then identifying schools that are closed for open enrollment. This presentation will cover the strategic directions of operations, staffing, and finance, also engagement in partnerships, and it touches on the core values of connections, integrity, equity, and excellence. So we haven't been innovative with this, but it's just a standard process that we go through. All right, so our RDTs, they provide families with an opportunity living within our school boundaries to request their child to attend a school outside of their assigned boundaries. And we actually get a significant number of requests every year. Those requests are considered around these following parameters: the space and the staff that have been allocated to that particular site. We do prioritize applications based upon siblings of currently enrolled students, applications related to approved achievement integration, and also children of school district staff members who work at that particular site that that family member wants that child to attend. If there are a number of intra-district transfers exceeds the available space, then we institute a lottery process, and it is actually a lottery process with the actual balls and the spinning, and it pushes it out a number, and then they're assigned a number. I kind of laugh at it. I'm like, wow, this is a real thing, but it's actually a real thing that takes place. Families are responsible for providing their own transportation when they request and the IDT is approved. And then the eligibility for athletic participation related to a transfer would fall under the parameters and guidelines set forth by the Minnesota State High School League. So we're not creating any advantages for one school over the next, and vice versa. We have 3 time periods that we meet and make decisions for the intra-district transfers. On the screen, you see those dates. Secondary starts a little earlier because we need to know student enrollments, and students need to be able to choose the courses that they want to take. So that date is December 15th. Elementary is March. And then you see once the deadline is set, we meet as a team, the 3 assistant soups plus the representatives from student information. We approve or disapprove, and then student information communicates with families via letters and phone calls, and you see the dates that correspond with that. And then we do it in March, December, and then we come back in May, and then we do it again at the beginning of August. And then if we have any families that move into the district after that August date, then we will consider those requests at that time. The next part of the presentation is related to our policy of 509, which is open enrollment. And this policy is connected to Minnesota's statute language, 124D.03, and it provides a non-resident family the opportunity to attend South Washington County schools. And because it's connected to legislation, we follow the parameters of 1% of our students enrolled at that grade level or in the district, or the number of district residents who choose another school district other than South Washington County. And we choose the lesser of the two, but it is a state mandate, and we make sure that we are following that state requirement. When we look at the definition of open enrollment, it's requested. It can be requested at grade level, and we look at schools that are under 95% capacity. And I will be bringing forth the resolution at the next meeting for board approval for this. We also have to make sure that space is available for the applicant under the enrollment cap standards. We have a booming, I would say, enrollment right now in our district, and a lot of interest from open enrollment. But we have to make sure that we stay within these parameters and make sure that we're not putting any schools or grade levels at a disadvantage. And the number of available spaces for open enrollment, like I said earlier in the previous slide, it is the lesser of the 1% of the total enrollment for that grade level, or the number of school district resident students who open enroll out of our district. The following is our timeline. We accept applications beginning December 1st all the way through January 15th, and then any applications received after that date, they are placed on a waiting list. And then we meet, and then we make decisions, and then we communicate to families by February 15th. The next slide identifies the schools that are currently closed for open enrollment. You see the elementary schools of Bailey, Gray Cloud, Pine Hill, and Red Rock Elementary, and those schools are closed because they're at 100% capacity or over 100% capacity. And then our middle schools remain closed: Cottage Grove, Lake, Oatman, and Woodbury, and our 3 comprehensive high schools are also closed to open enrollment. Any questions?
Tyrone, just to clarify, when you enroll, say you're a kindergartner coming to Woodbury L, you get to stay in the district till you graduate, correct?
That is correct.
And you continue to follow, like, since if you go to Woodbury L, you're likely to go to Woodbury Middle and Woodbury High School. So even though those 2 schools are closed for open enrollment, because you follow your pathway, you would be able, or do you follow your pathway, correct?
You do follow your pathway. We can't guarantee it, but it is strongly considered. And we have not had the situation where we've had to, change that up. But for the most part, once they open enroll, they become our student, and we want to, treat them as our student.
Any other questions?
For our online school, do we have open enrollment for that as well? And how does that work?
We do have open enrollment for our online school, and it follows the same process and procedures as a student in a traditional setting.
Is there a limit on how many students can enroll?
It's dictated by space, and I know the online could get interesting because you think you can load up the number of students in an online environment, but we have some parameters around class size, even in an online environment.
Where do you find the data that shows what's open and what isn't on the online?
We communicate with the office coordinator and the principal from our online school, and they provide information around available courses, available seats within courses.
I think one thing to point out about open enrollment is when families make application, they make application to open enroll into the school district. At that point, they're accepted under open enrollment, but may not be assigned to school because the school assignment is based on space available. And so at that point, we get to determine where it's available. We always do our IDTs in front of the OEs. Why is that? Because the IDT students are our resident students, and we want to make sure that the benefit goes to our resident students over open enrolled students. So just kind of understanding that process.
Tyrone, how much do we look into, excuse me, like the prospective kids that are going to be coming from like new housing developments and stuff compared to how much space we think we have? Do we go back and, look at those percentage and those numbers that we expect to get kids before accepting kids from out of district?
If I understand your question correctly, you're looking at projections, and we're looking at projections I would say in real time. When I say real time, we're talking about this current school year and the upcoming school year. Okay. We're not like forecasting out 2 years and beyond that, but more so the immediate incoming enrollment.
Okay, so basically 3 years, the year before and then the preceding year of that year. You're kind of looking at?
Like this current school year.
And then the one in the next year.
Yeah.
And I think the thinking has been that once a student is accepted, whether it's IDT or OE, then that cohort moves together, so then we've planned for them. I think it's important to note that the staffing process actually happens in March. And so when we talk about new homes, kids moving in, We have some buffer built in our secondaries because they don't tend to get staff added, whereas when kids move into our elementary school, depending upon which school and which grade level, we need to keep it at that 95, so if a student moves in, we still have a slot for an attendance boundary student.
Julie, one question is, when kids do apply for open enrollment, or families apply for open enrollment, do they get to prioritize, say like, because we have 10 elementary schools that are open for enrollment, right? Can they say, well, my first choice is, Armstrong, my second choice is Hillside, okay.
That is accurate. They can, on their application, put their choice of school, and then student information just tends to respond about if there are openings at those schools. And it may not be until a third school, or maybe it won't be any one of the three. Many times, individuals don't even go on the website to see which schools are closed, and it may be those 3 schools. And so then what student information would do is put out what schools we have openings at.
Okay, thank you. We are on to 5.2, Transportation Update, presented by Abby Baker, Executive Director of Human Resources and Operations.
Good evening. Tonight, before we start the transportation update, I want to recognize a couple of different groups. As you saw in this strategic planning presentation, RFID cards are one of our big work, and that has been a lift for our bus drivers and for our transportation team. And our bus drivers were in this summer learning our new system. We've had some bus drivers helping out office staff, and so we greatly appreciate, especially you 3 awesome bus drivers in the audience tonight. We appreciate your flexibility and your professionalism as we move the system forward. Also, when you're routing 14,000 students, there's a lot of details that go into all of that, especially in a year in which we have a newly implemented system. So special shout out to our office staff who have been working around the clock to get all of those students routed. And so their work is greatly appreciated. As you are aware, we have a transportation steering committee, and this was really a result of looking at staffing and shortages with the attempt to not cancel routes whenever possible. And so we really wanted to look at creating efficient and sustainable transportation for our families, not just in the current year, but in the future as well. One of the other goals is to reduce the number of bus routes needed, increase the accuracy of ridership. We've been exploring the radius method for measuring transportation distances, and then clearly defining what a hazard is, and then identifying hazardous areas. So some of the implemented changes from this school year that we discussed at the steering committee was we went into this year with the second year of required opt-in for transportation for all of our families. We moved the hazardous area north of Bailey Road for East Ridge High School students. We changed the start time for Red Rock Elementary, so they were a Tier 1 school. This year they're a Tier 3 start time school, and that helps balance transportation throughout the tiers. And then we reduced the number of routes for Pine Harbor Christian Academy students. So when you look at this 3-year snapshot of routes by year, in the 3 years we have saved 32 routes. Right now we're at 80 morning routes and 87 afternoon routes. We know this will change in the upcoming weeks as we look at load counts and capacities and look at what our current picture is there. But I think this goes to show that some of the efforts made by the steering committee, we have reached our goal in reducing some of those routes to make sure that they are properly staffed. This data also shows us that there is more need for afternoon transportation for our families. So new this year is the new routing software with the navigation and bus rider information. So all general education students get a bus rider ID, and they look similar to this. So students will swipe in and swipe out when they get on and off the bus. If they belong on that route, there will be a ding. If they don't belong on that route, there's a different sounding alert. So drivers are able to quickly identify if they don't belong on that route. Each driver on the bus has a tablet, and so there are turn-by-turn directions. It's very similar to like a Google Maps that you may be familiar with. And then as you approach the stop, it populates pictures and names of students who are at that stop. So it's really some increased measures for student safety and accountability. One of the major wins we had this year is that in that first week of school, we did not have any missing or unaccounted for students. And so when I was speaking with Carrie Olson, our Director of Transportation, this is the first year that she remembers in her 20 years of working here that we did not have a missing student, especially a kindergartner, because we know that happens in the first few days of school. So that tells us that the hard work of our bus drivers, listening for those dings, that we are really making sure that we prioritize student safety. Along with that, we're also going to be able to better view trends and more efficiently allocate resources. So we will be able to get a live look at load counts and capacities, and then make adjustments to routing from there. So another big win right now is that all routes are currently staffed with bus drivers. As you may remember, in the last couple of years, it's been a regular occurrence for our office staff and our bus mechanics to be covering routes. Going into this school year, all routes are staffed with bus drivers, which is great news. However, we are still going to monitor staffing and continue to hire bus drivers. Since early August, we've had 4 retirements or resignations, and we know that that happens at this time of year. We also have to plan for leave of absence, especially those unforeseen leave of absence, to make sure that we have the staffing to backfill those needs. Additionally, as we are working on implementing a new system and routing students, we have 2 positions in our office open. So we have a payroll position and a routing position. So if you know anyone, send them our way. So looking ahead in the next few weeks, our main priority is to get students that still need to get on buses and routed. And so as of August 26th, so that was a week before school started, we had 1,100 requests for transportation and or changes to transportation. So those are a lot of requests to process for each of those students. We were averaging about 50 new requests a day. As of yesterday, we were down to 200. So we hope that in the next week or so, we can get that leveled out. Traditionally, it does level out as you get through September, and then things stabilize by the end of September that way. So that is our main priority right now, is getting students routed on buses. After that, we will be working through timing issues with some of our current routes, in particular middle school routes. We will be using that new software to monitor load counts and make adjustments to routing as needed. We know our buses are more full this year than they ever have been. Our drivers can attest to that. And so we'll be looking at those capacities and looking at seeing if adding routes are possible at that time. Like I stated, we will continue to monitor staffing and continue to hire bus drivers and hopefully get those 2 office staff positions filled very soon. And then in October, we'll be reconvening the steering committee to review the changes that we put in place for this school year. And we will already begin looking ahead at next school year and looking at our staffing, looking at our routing, and seeing what changes we may need to implement for next year. Any questions?
Yeah, Abby.
Yeah.
So if a student gets on the wrong bus and the little ding ding goes off, then how are they redirected? To the correct bus? I mean, how do you know? Who does that?
Yep, so if it was an afternoon route, if it's a pickup at school, they would work to get the student on the right bus. If it is in the morning, we don't leave students at the bus stop. So the student will get on the bus and then we'll figure it out from there. Same with ID cards. I know that question has come up. If a student doesn't have an ID card, we are not turning students away from rides. They are still allowed to ride the bus.
I have a question about the bus routes. I've heard from some parents that their bus routes are lengthier this year. So I'm just wondering how we're addressing those longer bus rides.
Yeah, so once we get students on bus, that's what we're going to take a look at. It's mainly at the middle schools right now, and then even from there, it's really isolated to the Spanish immersion at the middle school level, so that's where we'll first start taking a look, which makes sense, because then we're busing from all areas of the district, but we want to get those times on buses as close to that 1 hour max as possible.
And then how is the card system working? I mean, we've been in school now for 2 weeks.
It's only 2 weeks.
Right? And I have a child in the district. You'd think I would know. Yeah, so how is it, are the kids catching on? Is it causing any delays for drivers? How is it working?
Yeah, It's good. And so I think the win, like I said before, is that we had all students accounted for and safe that first week of school. I was out watching it. It's really interesting to see. I think sometimes our kids are better with change than we are. Especially some of the littles loved swiping. They were excited about their badges, so that was really fun to watch. And it's change, right? It's getting used to that. It took them a little bit longer, probably in the first few days of school, to load and unload. And as they get used to swiping and doing the turn and what direction that the scanner is on, that'll get quicker too.
Are the littles tending to wear them around their necks, or are they having them attached to their backpacks, or what seems to be working
Yep, so
better?
they're attached to the backpacks. So during open house at some sites, they helped with those, getting them on the backpacks, but then also on the first day of school, teachers helped with that. Mm-hmm.
I have a question. When you're looking at routes for like high schools, we wouldn't start cutting routes because kids aren't, because I know like athletics, my son hasn't rode the bus all year because he's in athletics. So we're not going to look at, just because they haven't ridden yet this year, they're not going to be like.
No. Nope. Okay. If you've opted in, you will still have the ability to ride the bus. What we would look at is different types of routing, like could we add more students onto that route? Could we combine routes based on what those load counts are looking? But students will still be able to have a spot on the bus. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on to 5.3, financial update presented by Chris Blackburn, Director of Business Services.
So I'll tell you my exciting part of this last week. So we got to go to schools as the start of school, and I was at Nuevas, and the power went out. And I was in the office because I was just starting to head out, and I said, so do you want me, like, is there anything I can do, or do you just want me out of your hair? Because I know sometimes when I don't know what I'm doing, that may be more problematic. And so they're like, here, have a walkie-talkie and go make sure that no kids are lost in the hallways. I said, on it. So that was kind of fun because in the finance world, we don't often get to walk around with walkie-talkies in our schools. So I know. I came back, I was like, this is the most fun I've had. Financial update then, preliminary levy. So tonight my financial update really is regarding the preliminary levy for property taxes payable in 2025. So as we note here, the Department of Education, they must provide us preliminary reports to school districts by September 8th. So that did come out. If you want to look, I have some here. I was furiously taking notes during the levy presentation on Monday. Property tax levies are made with voter approval or at the discretion of local school board. Local levies for our district are about 20% of our general fund revenues. And I'll just remind people, when we talk about payable 25 levy, again, that's the actual taxpayers will make those payments in 2025. We call it 24 payable 25 levy often because we're implementing it in 24, making the decision then. Again, taxpayers will pay those funds in 25 and we'll actually collect the revenue, or it'll become revenue for the district reported as in 2026 fiscal year. Lots of numbers to keep track of. No wonder why I can't always tell what year I'm in. The state of Minnesota then does set formulas, as we talk many times during our presentations, that formulas that determine our revenue. And most of that revenue is based on specific amounts per pupil. The state also sets tax policy for local schools. In addition, they set a maximum of authorized property tax levy. And so the reason we point that out as well is at the next meeting, we'll ask for board to approve the preliminary tax levy. And typically we ask for them to approve it, the board to approve the maximum. We know that doesn't, we don't final approve the levy until December. And so that allows some adjustment opportunity if the state would make any changes. Districts, we can levy for less money, but we cannot go over that amount authorized by the state unless somehow we would have a November election. I left that information in there from last presentation. Last year we did have two successful operating and capital projects levies. So the state authorizes us to seek those referendums, and again, last year we did so. This year we don't have anything on the ballot for that. Again, we're very thankful for the support of our communities. But as a result of all the items noted above, this funding is highly regulated in the state of Minnesota. We frequently talk about the basic general education formula and it lagging inflation. Since 2002 and 3, the state general education revenue formula allowance has not kept pace with inflation. For fiscal year 25, an increase, as noted in our budget that we approved in June, was 2%, which is $142 over the previous year. That was legislative approved. Fiscal year 25, the legislature also, the amount specifically isn't set. However, they did put a formula in place that the increase is now tied to inflation. So there is a floor and a ceiling, so the minimum is 2% and the maximum is 3% currently. Again, if they always can take legislative action to change that, but that's currently what we'll anticipate being in that 2 to 3 for 25, 26. Being conservative, I likely will assume 2% unless we hear otherwise before then. The per pupil formula allowance for fiscal 25 of $7,281 would need to increase by another $13,064 or 18.7% to have kept pace with inflation since 2002-3, resulting, that allowance then would have been $86.45. And so again, that leg-in formula, so Eric, to your comment earlier on EL and things, these are sometimes those challenges that face. Not only do we have cross subsidies then that can diminish maybe what we have full access to, this leg-in, as a result of just not keeping up pace with inflation, really impacts us as well. The next slide is really just a visualization, if I can speak that tonight, of that general education formula allowance from 2003 to 2025, and just shows that gap and how that's widened over the course of the years. So there's not necessarily information there, just to see it a little visually sometimes helps. One of the items that we frequently talk about is the underfunding of special education, both from the federal level and the state level. According to the Minnesota Department of Education, in FY22, the costs of providing programs statewide were underfunded by $713 million. Even with the recent improvements in funding, so again, we talked about the increase in cross-subsidy aid that's, again, will increase once again in FY27. Despite that, in FY25, they're predicted to be underfunded by $435 million yet. So that change in that cross-subsidy aid was the result of why that number went down, but it still is significantly underfunded. The primary options the district we have to bridge that funding gap are to cut regular program budgets or to increase referendum revenue, which again our taxpayers were supportive of last fall, and most districts have done both of those.
What is our current special ed cross subsidy?
So it's roughly $24 million is our cross subsidy. They call it the net. And that's just, even on $300 million, that's a significant number. School district property taxes, again, each school district in the state of Minnesota can levy taxes in more than 40 different categories. The maximum levy amounts are calculated by MDE for each category, and those maximum levy amounts are set either by state law or by voter approval. So the different categories, I realized I didn't quite have that on that slide, but some various categories are that, again, the locally approved operating referendums, capital project levies that we've approved. We also levy for QComp, long-term facility maintenance. We also levy for community service programming and debt service programming as well, are just some areas, along with lease levy as well, for educational, instructional purposes only. A change in tax levy does not determine a change in budget. The tax levy is based on many state-determined formulas, plus the voter-approved referendums. Some increases in tax levies are revenue neutral because they are offset by reductions in state aid. So if we levy, sometimes the state will reduce our aid. Expenditure budget is limited by state-set revenue formulas, voter-approved levies, and our fund balance. So again, we can only spend what we have and what we get. An increase in school taxes does not always correlate to an increase in budget by the equal amount. Little difference in levy cycles. So I know as a school district, sometimes we, like I said, even with those numbers of 24, pay 25, revenue in 26. But as a school district, our budget year begins on July 1st, compared to the city or county, which begin on January 1st. So sometimes that calendar year versus fiscal year sometimes can cause confusion. The 25 taxes, again, will provide the revenue for us in 26, whereas for the cities and counties, that 25 taxes will be revenue for them in 2025. And as a reminder, we adopted our budget for 25 in June of 2024, and then our 26 budget will adopt next June. So there's always that we're adopting budgets before we've had levies set, and so that poses some challenges and some assumptions that we have to make. Some background and property tax background. Every owner of taxable property in the county pays property taxes to, in the state, pays property taxes to various taxing jurisdictions. So not only the school district, but they also would pay county, city, township. Sometimes there are special districts, such as watershed districts, in which the property is located. So growing up, I now own a little bit of land up in Monoman County, and so me and my siblings own a quarter of 3 acres, and so we'll pay property taxes up there as well. Similarly, in my property that I own personally too. So same in our residents here in our community, they will also pay not only, and they sometimes will pay different districts depending where they live. Washington County stretches from nearly to Forest Lake all the way down, to here, and so that's the South Washington County when I tell people where we're located. And so it can get kind of confusing on property tax statements sometimes because those jurisdictions can look differently. Even the city of Woodbury, you may be in Stillwater School District or you may be in South Washington County School District. Each taxing jurisdiction sets their own tax levy, and again, often based on those limits set by state law. The county serves as the collection agent for all property taxes, and then they distribute the funds back to the taxing jurisdictions. So what's happening with each slice? We often get asked, well, geez, if mine went up, everybody's must have gone up, and that doesn't always. The higher market value just increases. There's the same amount of levy dollars, it's just how it's spread across taxes. So I said, the pie is still kind of, because it's that, we can only encompass the pie, that's our levy itself. And then if you're higher market value, if you have an increase, you get a little bigger slice of that pie. If your home has a lower market value, you get a smaller, and if it would increase, it's a smaller slice. So it just changes that amount of property taxes. But again, each owner pays a portion of that pie. The impact on property valuations, again, which is not, the district has no control over property valuations, but if we have an example of 2 properties in the district and both houses are valued at $100,000 and the levy of $500 and the equal value would be $250 each. However, if the orange house increases by 10% in a year and the blue house increases by 25%, we still only receive the $500 in levy. Same amount, even though the values themselves increased, but the orange house will pay a little bit less and the blue house will pay a little bit more. So getting back to that pie, they'll just get a little bigger slice of the pie or a little smaller slice of that pie of the levy they're paying. Next steps, so again, we did just receive the preliminary levy reports this week. We did have the tax levy workshop on Monday, and so it was about 2 hours of just, actually about 4 hours of sitting through, I think it's 39 pages of numbers. We always audit every levy and make sure that we are receiving the aid and the levy dollars that we're supposed to. The board approves the 24 pay 25 preliminary levy at its next meeting, so again, we'll have a request for that approval at the maximum. And then we'll approve the final levies in December, along holding the truth and taxation hearing at that time as well. With that, any questions?
Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I was going to say, are you feeling okay tonight?
I've seen this presentation. I don't know. Years ago.
Okay, on to 6.0, reports and comments. And our first one will be Superintendent Julie.
I think I just wanted a slice of that pie, and I wanted the one that was just a little more. I always say it's truly the most wonderful time of the year. There is an excitement and joy in our schools that really is only meant for kids and the adults that live in those spaces. I always know I don't like the end of the year because it's always sad, things come off the walls and there's a quietness. And so when you enter our schools, it truly is the most wonderful time of the year. To share with the board and the community, right now, actually as of this morning, we were at over 19,000 students, which we are very pleased with that enrollment. We hope that trend continues. That was all of our withdrawals as well as our new students into our system. So that's great news. And since our last board meeting, of course, we welcome back our 6th and 9th graders. They have a great day. That first day is so valued. And as I was out in the school, it's understanding the school layout. For middle schoolers, it's getting your locker open, getting to meet staff, finding a friend, knowing where the cafeteria is. You know, we have schools that have multiple levels, and just understanding and figuring out the space. And we take for granted that they're 6th and 9th graders, But in these big, large schools, they're very small bodies, and so it just sets a really nice tone. And the staff is surrounding the kids and making sure that that first day for those 6th and 9th graders goes great. And then, of course, September 4th, we welcome all others. One of my joys is always to be at a school and watch our kindergarten teachers, who at some points deserve more pay than other teachers, just for keeping our littlest learners and, of course, our early learning. But our kindergarten students coming in with their families in that first day and those parents saying goodbye to their kids. Now, having been through 2 and having college graduation and all of the other phases in between, I'm like, this isn't quite as big a deal. But in that moment, it is the biggest deal to have parents walk away. And every year, you can guarantee there's one student that's going to cry as a parent has to walk away. And that is a really, really tough feeling. But just really a great opening. And I think despite some of the hiccups, they're very normal. Lunches got delayed a little. The bus routes were a little bit late or a little bit early, and so we continue to work through all of those things. Thank you to our executive cabinet members, our district office staff. Everybody is out in schools, and so while Chris had a walkie-talkie, someone else was walking a student who came off the bus and was crying and saying, "My mom didn't tell me which hallway to walk down." So lots of things happening, but thank you to our leaders in the district. Also, thank you to our bus drivers. We know that the weight of this new rider ID system is not just on our bus drivers, but that our teachers, our parents, everyone has lots of questions, and we're working through that. But thank you to our bus drivers, because we know that's a whole new system. We do hope that our bus drivers take the opportunity. I know the bus drivers we have here tonight probably know student names, but what a great way when students scan on to also get to know students and call them by name. And then finally, you heard tonight, Dr. Brookins talked about that READ Act training, and I just want to share with the board that the staff we heard from was extremely grateful to have that time built into the school calendar. That didn't happen everywhere, and so to make that a priority so that our staff could really focus on the training was wonderful. And then finally, we're already hearing about spring break 2026, and so yesterday we met, our calendar committee met for the first time. We hope to have our draft 25-26 school year calendar to the board for a first reading in early November, with a final read of that calendar on November 21st. And that's just pending if there are any other bumps that we might run into, but we're hoping by the end of November that 25-26 calendar is approved, so we can get that out online and families can continue to make plans. But with this, just thank you again to our leaders, to board members. It was a great opening.
Thank you, Julie. Any board members have any events or upcoming events to share?
One thing is that if, for any of the board members, if you have not RSVP'd for the City of Woodbury Development Tour, that's coming up on Monday. So if you haven't, you should probably do that tomorrow, since tomorrow is Friday. That's it.
What time is that?
It's at 5 to 7 at City Hall.
Thank you, Simi. Okay, we will move on to 7.0, future meeting dates, September 26, 2024, school board business meeting here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. Then October 10th, 2024, school board workshop meeting, also here at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. And then 8.0 is a closed session pursuant to Minnesota 13D.05, subdivision 3A for the superintendent evaluation. Motion to approve moving to closed session.
So moved.
Motion by Simi, seconded by Ryan. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Just a reminder for our 4 people in the audience and anybody watching at home that following this closed session, there will be no action items. The board will return to open session only to adjourn. Thank you.